Andor Season 2 is fast approaching, and both trailers released so far very heavily featured the planet Ghorman. This alludes to a crucial storyline from way back in Star Wars Legends, but I suspect that's not the story we're going to get in Andor Season 2. I suspect that Tony Gilroy is going to take what the fanbase thinks it knows about the Ghorman Massacre and flip it on its head. Why do I think this? Stay tuned to Star Wars Playbill Collect, and let's take a look at everything we know so far. I think we need to start with a look at what is the Ghorman Massacre and why it is so important. Now, I'm not going to go into massive detail here, that would be a video all of its own. So let's just quickly summarise what we already know before Andor Season 2. And once again for that I dive back into my collection of these wonderful old sourcebooks from the West End games, role-playing and tabletop games from the late 80s and early 90s. And as far as I'm aware, this is the earliest mention of the Ghorman Massacre and even the planet Ghorman itself. And you can see here the book describes a meeting between Mon Mothma and Bail Organa in the early days of the rebellion, discussing the importance of this massacre. As I said in one of my earlier videos, these sourcebooks are a goldmine of fantastic information. If you'd like to see me do videos on these books specifically, let me know in the comments. Now, the Legends material on this has changed a great deal over the years. A number of various different versions of this story have been told. In a recent interview, Tony Gilroy himself mentioned that the Ghorman Massacre is going to be featured in Andor Season 2 over the course of 5 episodes. Tony mentioned the magnitude of the event and hopes that the Star Wars fanbase will appreciate the fact they've tried to tie this up nicely. Given that Tony wasn't a big Star Wars fan coming into these projects, I once again suspect that this information has come from Pablo Hidalgo. If you're unfamiliar with him, he's the lore master for Lucasfilm, and in his early days he did in fact work at West End Games on these very role-playing games. So let's have a brief summary of what the story is in Legends. We know that Ghorman is in the colony sector and it's along the Rimmer trade route. And we also know the planet is a hotbed of anti-imperial sentiment. And we know this is going to stay correct because we see Mon Mothma mention this a number of times in Season 1. So the traditional narrative here is that there's a peaceful process and the Empire violently overreacts, and hundreds, possibly thousands of deaths occur to these peaceful protesters, and that this event then becomes a catalyst for Mon Mothma's declaration of rebellion. Now, it's quite possible this may play out exactly as we expect it to do from Legends, and we can see a lot of parallels between this incident and what we saw happen in Season 1 on Ferrix. But I don't think this is going to be the case. I think Tony Gilroy and his writing team are far too canny for this. I don't think they're just going to copy and paste this from Legends, and I certainly don't think they'd do something like this that would feature over 5 episodes. I think this is just too big an opportunity to really twist the narrative of Star Wars. And really this is what Rogue One and Andor have been all about so far. Bringing that grittier, more realistic edge to the Star Wars universe, and blurring the lines between what we think are good and evil. Now, we know Tony Gilroy is a big student of history, and I think what they're setting up here is a false flag. I think agents within the rebellion are going to be the ones that start the violence on Ghorman. And of course the Empire won't just react, they'll overreact, as they always do, as they did to the Aldhani heist, and as they did on Ferrix. That then raises the question of who is going to be responsible. And if we play the fun game of putting ourselves in the heads of Tony and the writing team here, I think there are only really 3 main possibilities. The obvious culprit is of course Cassian himself, and we see from the trailers that Cassian is indeed going to be on Ghorman and play some kind of a fairly major part in the events. Now, this show is called Andor, he is the main star of the show, so it would make sense that he's going to be the focal point, but for me that just doesn't quite add up. We've already seen in Season 1 Andor was a major player in the Aldhani heist, and he's partly responsible for the situation on Ferrix. And of course the whole point of Rogue One is that he ends up becoming one of the people who steals the plans for the Death Star. And of course there's a possibility that in Season 2 he'll also play a part in the extraction and rescue of Mon Mothma. So to have Cassian present is one thing, but to have him responsible for it just seems like it's too big a stretch for me. Surely you just can't have one man responsible for all the events that bring about the birth of the rebellion. The next likely culprit I think could be Luthen, and we see in that incredible speech in Season 1, Luthen feels like he's lost everything, he's driven, he's passionate, he's crazy enough to pull something like this off. We know he's fully committed, we know he's all in. Tony Gilroy, talking about this season 1 scene between Luthen and Mon Mothma, says the key word here is Luthen says to Mon, there are no rules from this point on. In season 1, Tony's made it clear time and time again just how far Luthen is willing to go. In this interview, Tony says that Luthen is an accelerationist. He's someone who's prepared to make things worse, to make things better. But I don't think he's going to pull this off himself. Of course, it's possible he could be using Cassian to do the dirty work here. I would think his attendant Clea is another possibility, yet we haven't seen her go out into the field very often. Or perhaps he has Clea bring in Vel. After all, Vel is proven she was part of the successful Aldhani heist. So that would make a lot of sense. But of course there is also someone else connected to Luthen, who I think could also be a strong candidate for this. That is of course everybody's favourite madman, Saw Gerrera. Now we've seen Saw quite extensively in both trailers, we've seen his Cavern Angels and his Partisans, so we know he's gonna play a major role. Setting up the Empire for this kind of operation is just the sort of thing that Saw Gerrera would do, and we saw many times in Star Wars Rebels. If you haven't seen Rebels, please go and watch it, it's excellent. In Rebels we really saw the beginnings of Saw going off on a tangent and disagreeing with the rest of the rebellion and being willing to take those extra steps into the vagaries of terrorism that the rest of the rebellion just weren't ready for yet. Now of course this all has to tie in with both Rebels and what we know from Rogue One. And it's made very clear in Rogue One that Saw Gerrera has completely fallen out and lost contact with the rest of the rebellion. And we had that scene where Mon Mothma mentions that he's caused them many problems in the past. So I'm really interested in what you think about this. Do you think I'm along the right lines here? To me this just seems like it's too big an opportunity for Tony and his team to twist that narrative and make this something the Rebels were actually responsible for. So what do you think? Do you think they're going to go with the traditional Legends narrative? Could Cassian be responsible? Could Luthen be responsible? Vel? Clea? Or even of course Saw Gerrera? We'll of course find out in just a few weeks' time, but until then I can't wait to see what you think about this. As always, jump down, get into the comments, let's get a discussion going. Don't forget to hit the like button on the way out, and don't forget that I really appreciate you taking the time to watch one of my videos. And if you've liked this one, you might like some of my other videos. So here's my suggestions of what to watch next, and I hope you'll join me for another video very soon. Thanks for watching.